Hello together.
Hallo, grüß euch. Hey.
Hallo, hi.
Und ihr macht uns jetzt groß?
So, schönen guten Morgen. Nochmal.
Guten Morgen.
Schönen guten Abend, ich bin Anne Lepin. Neben mir sitzt Maria Köpf. Wir beide begrüßen euch zu unserem 15. Filmtalk. Und wir freuen euch gerade in den jetzigen Zeiten, euch das zu bieten, wofür die Filmakademie steht, nämlich der Austausch über unsere kreative Arbeit.
We would like to say a warm welcome to our wonderful guests tonight. Please welcome cinematographer Ari Wegner from Australia and production designer Grant Major from New Zealand.
Hello, everybody.
Who have both been nominated for an Academy Award for their fantastic work on the film The Power of the Dog by Jane Campion. We're very excited to have them both here tonight at the German Film Academy and wave a warm welcome to them. And tonight's talk will be hosted by our two board members, Christian Goldbeck, Szenenbildner, and Matthias Fleischer, DOP. And I'm sure they've prepared a round of really interesting questions for tonight. We have around 45 minutes, 50 minutes for this talk, and I would suggest we go straight to the discussion. I'm wishing you all a wonderful, inspiring evening from us here at the Film Academy, and thanks again, Ari and Grant, for being with us here tonight. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and again, congratulations for your BAFTA awards you got, and for the Venice Golden Silver Lion as well. So we're really excited to have you here and ask you the questions we wanted to get answered. The first introduction, ladies first. Ari is born and raised in Australia, and as I read, she discovered her passion for writing and photography in high school, and followed by studying at the Victorian College of Art in Melbourne. She did a lot of short films, two awarded by the ACS, the Australian Camera Society, a Cinematography Society, and really a bunch of long feature films like Grey Matter, Ruin, Lady Macbeth, In Fabric, Stray, Zola, and now The Power of the Dog. And Jane Campion, who did the direction of The Power of the Dog, met Ari first time at a commercial shooting years ago, I guess before she shot Top of the Lake, the TV series. Now the two, Grant and Ari, are here and got an Academy Award nomination. She is the only second woman in the Academy's history after Rachel Morrison for Mudbound in 2018, together with Greg Fraser, Dan Lawson, Bruno Del Bonell, and John. Too. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello, Grant. Grant was born in Palmerston in North New Zealand, and his career in design began at Television New Zealand. His background ranges from production design for the Commonwealth Games ceremonies to designer for New Zealand's pavilion at the World Expos in Australia and Spain. He helped create the cinematic worlds of Middle-earth, which he earned an Academy Award for The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King in 2003. He designed the Imperial China in 2020's Mulan, post-World War II Japan in The Empire, and Depression era New York in 2005's King Kong. And now, as Ari has pivoted to 1925 Montana in The Power of the Dog. His second work with Jane Campion, After an Angel at Her Table, which is now more than 30 years ago. And a very warm welcome to you too, Grant.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
The first question is kind of a triplet of questions going to both of you. It's the question, when did you get involved? Like how much in advance of the project's beginning? At what state of your own preparation have you two met each other and started to share thoughts? And what drew you into the story, into the characters firsthand?
I'll kick off. I'll say also sorry for my voice tonight. I'm fine. I've just sound a little bit husky. Jane called me. It was December of, I think it was 2018, saying we were looking to shoot in January of 2020. So it was just over a year before. And then Grant, I think you and I met probably that following March when we went on a location scout. And yeah, I went on a bit of a tour of the South Island of New Zealand looking for what could be the Burbank Ranch. So what I love about location scouting is not just the locations that you hopefully find, but you spend hours and hours kind of in vans and lunches and dinners, and you're really getting to know the whole team that you're starting this journey on. And then what drew me in, I mean, there was really nothing about this project that made me ask myself, I don't know, should I do this? Everything was the dream, really. A director like Jane, the long preparation, the story itself and the world. Jane's adaptation is so beautiful as well. The book also is incredible. And I think that's what drew me in. I really love it, a really specific world, a time and a place that's maybe something I don't know much about. But through the making of the film, I become, as much as one person can be, kind of an expert on some very specific time and place in history. And I also love the characters and the structure of the book. As Jane has described it, a bit like the rope. They really intertwine and they can't be separated. Each one has their part. And as the narrative progresses, the character development also progresses kind of at the same pace. So we're learning what's happening and then we're learning via this about the characters. So yeah, really irresistible project, I would say.
Thank you.
Yes, and from my perspective, of course, as Ari has mentioned, her and Jane had already established a kind of a working relationship before I came on. Yes, I had worked with Jane 30 years prior, and we both got to know each other quite well then, as we all do on these film projects, on these creative exercises. But it was really a thrill for her to contact me and ask if I'd be interested in talking to her about it. It was not a given that I was going to get the job. She really just wanted to talk about where I'm at creatively, and that we were, had potential to be good collaborators on this, because she does spend a lot of time sort of cultivating this creative group around her, this family of people. And as Ari was saying, a lot of our sort of the core creative team did that, and bouncing around in the back of a van looking at these locations, and also being distracted. Jane does like to sort of press pause every now and again and go and have a picnic somewhere, and or go to a second-hand shop and just sort of ferret around looking for interesting objects. And ultimately the sort of conversation on these things comes back to the power of the dog, and but on a different level. It can be on a kind of very, very sort of deeply creative level. And I remember being grilled about, Grant, what's your sexuality? Let's talk about our sexuality in the van. something I don't often talk about on location scouts and things like that. But of course, it's a very important theme in the film, and I guess she was interested in all of our kind of perspective on things like that. So yeah, it's this sort of workshopping, I guess, with her, the group of people she has around her, in much the same way that she does with the cast, I would imagine. So we became a very close group before, during, and now after this exercise, and it's just a very beautiful group of people that came together to do it. And of course all that permeates through to the crew generally. It had a really good sort of vibe all the way through the filming of this, and everybody really, as a consequence, just gave it their all, because we're on a special project here. It wasn't just any other film, it was like a very special film. Yeah.
Ari, you had some experience in shooting long time feature with Ruin, for example, in Cambodia for over 2 years. prepping for a year and then shooting for a couple of months, I guess was not so unusual for you, but more a dream. But Grant, is it usual for you to have so much preparation time? Is it new for you?
Yeah, it was sort of the way we went about the preparation, really. Jane, every film's different and every director's different that I've worked with, and Jane is like a one-off, really. She's very, very she likes to not take the first answer to things. She does like to work her way through all options and not make her mind up about things until she really has to. In fact, there were some times when I'd have to come to her and say, Jane, we have to decide on which location we're going to use now because we have to start building it. So things like that. So, it was just, I do work on a lot of films that have long preparations like this, and I'm usually doing it with production art and, all these sorts of things that I present to the production. But Jane, being the sort of auteur that she is, she was just like the one person that was sort of driving the whole thing forward creatively. And so it was really just, I was able to relate to her on a very sort of personal level rather than on a sort of a business level, if you know what I mean.
And I mean, it was on one hand side, it was this kind of really intimate, character-driven project, and at the same time presented itself on this large scale somehow, and it comes across so far away from the Roaring Twenties as we are used to from The Great Gatsby, but it's still kind of the scale of the house and the surrounding doesn't kind of clashes somehow with the Montana backdrops. How grand do you hunt down this genesis of the house and the relation of the house towards this landscape, or better saying, what's the backstory? What's your backstory? What you wanted to show us with your production design? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, look, the film is full of really interesting juxtapositions, and you mentioned the big landscape and the big house, but it's also a very intimate story where we peel back the layers of this kind of masculine character to find the emotional core of Phil Burbank. So, there's an internal, sort of personal, forensic kind of look at this character against this vast background. And, we played with other themes that sort of echo this in a way, the sort of the inside of the house and the outside of this big landscape, the sort of the darkness of the inside of the house and the brightness of the outside landscape. And, it was really talking through all these kind of potential kind of themes, I guess, in the early times, and sort of talking about how we can carry them out. The book itself, of course, is another touchstone, and the book has a way longer sort of time frame with a lot of detail in it that doesn't get told in the script per se, but that's my role was to sort of bring that sort of family history and perspective to the environments that we're in, so that we feel like that the characters have this sort of depth to them, and via these, in particular, these very traumatic and very important moments that have happened in the near past. Within the first 5 minutes of the film, we're already reflecting on something that's happened, and 1900, what are we celebrating here? Phil says to his brother George, and so that's one of the core themes in the family history, is what happened 20 years ago. But also the house itself is 40 years old. We know that through the book that the family came there to Montana and built this house with all sorts of aspirations about being a gentleman cattle rancher and being the social centre of the whole sort of district, and how that fizzled out, and now we're left with this big boned, quite fancy house in this fairly raw dusty, brilliantly sunny kind of semi-deserty landscape, you know. So again, there's a sort of a very interesting sort of juxtaposition about aspirations and about the reality of the way our story starts. So, you know, the story to me is redolent of all those sorts of things, and that's what I loved about that script when I first read it. It's got these great sort of extremes.
Talking about dust, what has been your approach and references firsthand for colors? How picturing history, the color palette, the movement of the camera, the framing. It's not a 1925 reenactment movie, not at all. So what was your approach, Ari, for that?
Yeah, well, I guess the benefit that comes from having a year is you can really explore every option and not just have to shoot the first idea, but you can go through rounds of ideas in the same way a script would get to draft 7 or 8 before you shoot. We can do the same thing with the visuals. So we really explored every kind of possible idea. But what we started to see a theme in those ideas of what we liked was this kind of idea of minimalism. Like, what could be the least amount of parts we would need, the least amount of shots, the least amount of camera movement, the least amount of colors, the least amount of, in many ways, like the least amount of things to tell the story we needed to tell. And so the color palette for me always starts with the location, because that's something that is always going to be in the frame, and often it's a huge percentage of the frame. It could be 85-90% of the frame is going to be what's behind the actors in the costumes and so forth. So yeah, for me, it's locations and walls are kind of the same thing in terms of color. They're what's going to be a big part of the frame. So once we had that location in the South Island, we very specifically chose to location scout the same time of year we would be shooting, so we could see the grass and the foliage and the trees. And from there, there's a kind of decision to be made. And we have the grass, which is very silvery, kind of white, a little bit golden. And then knowing we're going to have animals and this color of the horses and the cattle, which is kind of blacks and browns. We're going to have leather and human skin, which is kind of still in that same pale browns to, skin tones, all in that kind of natural world. And the question is, do you want to expand that and have this whole rainbow by adding, or do we want to stay kind of within that world? So, and that idea of minimalism, and also unifying, we knew there was going to be VFX, we knew there was going to be, we're shooting Montana for New Zealand and mixing old things with built things, and Jane had an idea that if we could reduce the color palette, it would give everyone a kind of unified place to start from, start narrowing down the decisions. And then the camera movement is kind of an interesting one, because Jane and I talked a lot about what we wanted from the film and also what we didn't want, the kind of films we liked and we didn't like, in terms of the viewer's experience for an audience. And we really liked the idea of a film that would engage an audience on the right level. So the level that we enjoyed most, which is, how do you get the information to be kind of the right level of exposition, the right level of information telling, to be a satisfying amount to keep someone engaged, but not tell them exactly what to think at any moment. And one of our rules was that we didn't want to do any emotionally manipulative camera moves, so to not do a big camera kind of push in on an emotional moment or point too specifically about what an audience should feel at any given moment. It's really up to you can watch a character feeling something, but the camera doesn't tell you, the viewer, what to feel about it.
And how about the framing? Because you could shoot everything between 1.33 and 2.40. I guess the landscape helped a lot, but I read that it wasn't your first choice for doing it.
Correct. Yeah, we had actually initially decided to shoot 1:8:5 aspect ratio from a very kind of pragmatic decision. Jane is a big she's a very romantic kind of person. She's also very practical, and she had this idea that, or very wisely knew that we knew the film was going to have a home on a streaming service at some point, would be seen in people's homes a lot, and she really liked the idea of using the most amount of the screen. But then when we started storyboarding, we just found ourselves really drawing kind of off the edges. And there's so many images in the film which kind of have a long shape to them, the mountain range or a line of cattle on the horizon, even the rope, someone lying down, a table with a lot of people at it has got like a kind of shape like this. So we eventually realized the film was kind of telling us that it needed more room on the sides, and I'm really glad we did, actually, because I really like what it does for this film.
Seeing the film, you have the impression everything is on its place, and this vast landscape is beautiful, and even the houses is already given. But when you see the visual effects showreel of the company who did that, you see how many shots are altered, especially in the backgrounds, in the landscaping, even in the house building and everything. How did you find the location that is suitable to be altered by visual effects to what you had in mind? Because it's quite of an adaptation. You have to do every location you see to play through all the possibilities you probably could have in the visual effects. So what was this search for?
Yeah, that was a big question for us when we were location scouting, the dog, because it's described. It's not described ever specifically what it is in the book or the screenplay. And Jane's a big, whenever there's a problem, she kind of goes straight to it, or anything that's scary or anxiety inducing, it's where to start. I'm kind of the opposite. I don't want to look, it's too much. A terrible procrastinator, but that was a big topic of conversation for us on that first scout of what would the dog look like? Where could it fit? And she also had the very wise idea knowing that we should get a visual effects supervisor on very early and not leave that for something to worry about later. So it was really a team effort, myself, you, Grant, Jane, and Jay, who was our visual effects supervisor, about what it could be. And I think what we all loved about Jane is she's so open to ideas, and there's no, she'll very openly kind of accept everyone's suggestions, and it really creates an environment of letting ideas come and more ideas come, and we just keep talking about it until we find something that kind of unlocks or something that sticks around as an idea.
And how was it possible to be able to sell this vast, full-scale impression of the ranch, of the space around the house, the hills and everything? Because I assume that it's not found on location, maybe 50-60% of that, but the rest, I guess, is altered in visual effects. So what was your approach to that? How did you imagine like putting the ranch into a valley or with the hillside of Montana in the background? Have you had any references from Montana, for example, or?
Well, what we ask ourselves is that, was there kind of a fictional map you drew out in your heads before, like for the relations of the houses, how they are relate to each other, where the town is, where the rail track's going to be built. How did this all come together?
Yeah, maybe Grant, you can talk about that. There's many a PDF was made.
Yeah. Well, look, it's like it's a mixture of things, really. The film was sort of made at a scale, a sort of a budget scale, and we wanted to sort of centre ourselves on our prime location farm, which we found in the Ida Valley in the South Island. We were lucky that it gave us like an empty slate to be able to build our Burbank ranch. So, we knew fairly early on that we were going to have to build the house, build the stables, and build the cattle yards and all the outbuildings and things like that. The spot we found was very beautiful. It has a very beautiful mountain range to the north called the Hawkton Range, and that's where the dog you were referring to earlier on appears as a piece of pareidolia. But it had a sort of very strong sense of place. You know, it's to me, over and above the notion of it being in Montana. Of course, the book's written for Montana in 1925. Most of the story happens on that ranch. So it was a very important find for us to be able to do that. We were also very lucky that the property was of a size that it had all these different parts to it where we could stage different dramatic beats, like the grassy field where the haystack was just kind of over the back and a little bit down further, and we were able to find this valley that was actually quite self-contained and had a beautiful sort of view out to the west. So, you know, that was on the same farm. Further to that, the town of Beach was also really within probably a quarter of a mile of where we built the main Burbank ranch, and it was that instance where the backgrounds were changed by visual effects a reasonable amount to take away the recognisable mountainscape around it, and just to make it kind of more bleak and more open and more sort of desolate in a way. So that was, like I say, that was on the same farm. The cemetery hill behind the Red Mill in Beach was also on the same farm. So, you know, it gave us a lot of those opportunities for all the main sort of dramatic areas and the main build for it to be within cooee of each other. Then we went further afield, but again within the same valley for the big cattle herding scenes that we saw near the beginning of the film. So that was just really within about 40 miles of where we were had based ourselves. So there's a lot of different aspects coming to it. There's the creative, obviously, but there's the practical. You know, is this film going to service us from a production point of view? Can we find people around here who can help build it? Because you know, we didn't want to bring all the building and painting and plastering crew from Auckland. And we had to be able to live there. We had to be able to accommodate ourselves. So, you know, all these sort of factors come into it. And it's not an easy decision to make, as you might understand.
Yeah, before we talk a little bit more about also the characters in the spaces, I mean, to tell to our audience, I mean, the incredible thing is that actually so many things came together there. I mean, the house was, I understood, was only built up to, you know, like the second floor, but without any roof on top. So that came later in set extension. Basically, the whole establishing shots of the little shanty town, I would call it, the western town, came completely later on in the machine. And also, I mean, what Matthias and I were fascinated how you were able also with lighting to kind of obviously put a stage construction in Auckland for the interiors together with the original locations you built outside. Because, I mean, the light control of this really kind of quite heavy light outside and then going to stage and then still having this impression that you can really feel the outside. I mean, how we ask ourselves, how did you manage to actually kind of do those splits between stage and the outside without the audience kind of really not getting the feel of a split at all?
What do you think, Ari?
Yeah, that was one of my biggest anxieties going into the film, especially as Jane's films have a real authenticity to them and nothing, if anything, feels cliche or kind of fake. She has a radar to get in and it can't be there. So as my big responsibility as a cinematographer, obviously, is kind of that blend. And I think there were a few crucial decisions that really helped us. One was, I'm not sure, Grant, if it was your idea or Jane's, but to build at least one room that we built twice, the kitchen, the area where the cowboys have breakfast, and parts of the kitchen, and allowing some shots to see people coming and going. And there's one shot where Rose runs out the door, and having at least one room that we could kind of sell, I guess, as and early on you see from within there Phil walking outside. It's almost like if you see it once, you can kind of don't ask yourself again. Another thing I'm really pleased with the outcome was Grant's really great idea, and maybe it was an idea, or maybe it was just a budget workaround, but to print backdrops rather than green screen or blue screen. So we took, our visual effects supervisor, Jay, took kind of panoramic photos of our location and then printed them on very low basic technology, not a translite or anything fancy, just like a kind of advertising billboard on vinyl stretched that we put outside the windows, and then light them for brighter for day, and then dusk, light them for dusk, light them for night, the same backdrops. We really only had 3 or 4 kind of vistas which we would use for the upstairs and downstairs. And then we, from a lighting perspective, I think it was very wise as well, or lucky, I'm not sure, that we shot the location work first, so that having experienced that for multiple weeks, the intensity of the light, the color of the light, the feelings of the different times of day, I'm really glad we experienced that, because it gave us a great lighting reference for any scenes that really did intercut. But B, it just gave you a sense of just how bright it really is out in there. And we'd also done a lot of location scouts at various times of year. So we'd been there in winter, we'd been there in spring, and then I think as well, I'm pretty particular on set. I really poor standby props, etc. Never really get to sit down because I'm constantly asking, can we get some dust when they open the door? Can we get wind? We need the bottom of their shoes to be wet. I want this. So I'm really into the detail of it, dust and mud and, that kind of little bits of detail. And as well, I think in the lighting style, which I think is a theme we like over the whole thing, that there's something really beautiful about kind of imperfection. For me, there's not, when something's too perfect, it can look a bit like a commercial or something. That's a different style of photography or filmmaking. Nothing against commercials, it's just not what we were going for. So if the lighting feels too perfect, I would kind of break something, move something so it's not perfectly correct. Or we did a lot of our lightings through, for example, some of the great glass that Grant's team had made, this kind of custom glass that was the same style of old glass from the 1920s, so the light's not ever too perfect. So yeah, a big no one solution, but trying to really look at each frame and make sure it feels the same level of authenticity as the location work.
Because of the dark interior and this three-dimensional feel of those surfaces, I mean, the characters inside, they feel like trapped, like moss. I mean, whenever there's light coming in from any source, and kind of you more or less automatically, they're always drawn to the light. So at least it feels like this. So, and then you just like, whenever Phil is appearing, he's kind of more or less in the dark. So the Rose looks into the dark when he looks at him. But at the other times, I mean, the natural light that comes from outside is like the actors or the characters are more or less drawn to the light. And I think that was just a fantastic result, like how they're trapped into this, in this dark hole where nothing changed for the last 20 years. So
yeah. Thank you. That's a big compliment. Thanks very much.
No, beautiful.
And talking about the positions of the characters, how did you find your camera position, your own position, and your perspective in relation to and in between the characters? For example, Phil's character reads a bit strong at the beginning, a bit direct, but then he unfolds a variety of readings. Sometimes your work feels like segments of a monster film, sometimes like very carrying, intimate with him. So how is your position to this character and the other main characters as well? How did you find that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We from most of the scenes we storyboarded some initial ideas. Jane and I, we spent about a month together, just her and I, with no distractions, drawing and trying to come up with at least a plan that we knew could work, knowing as well on the day we would need to be reacting to what felt kind of right. And yeah, it's in many ways as well, I think what's maybe underappreciated is the script, the adaptation, that you're given little pieces of information about a character and you start to build an idea of what you think that person is. And then at the perfect time, a scene will come in to kind of explode the idea that you had, or make a crack in the idea you had about this person. But we Phil is kind of, a complex kind of person, in that also has this great kind of powerful silhouette that is a bit like you said, a monster. It's kind of an animal, the legs that have this fur, the hat is kind of very tight. He's like a man on top and then an animal underneath. And often we did shoot him like that. There's some very extreme kind of low angles up on him where sometimes he looks kind of like a hawk, like a bird kind of looking down. And again, in the design, which is also all the way back to the novel, that he's often kind of looking down. He looks down on Rose when she's drinking and down when she's playing the piano. So we start to build an idea of his kind of power. And then we discovered, it started in the scene where he has the swimming and where he's has the scarf, that having a handheld camera very close to him really changes something for an audience, I think, especially when he's such a kind of prickly character. He doesn't let people come close, and he keeps all his kind of, for his own safety, his information very secret inside him. Even his costume, everything's like buttoned up. And then when the camera handheld very close, you feel as an audience, you're getting to see something so private that a very private person has somehow let you watch something, and you start to really build an empathy, I think, because you the audience, see something that no one else gets to see. And we slowly start to feel a connection with him, despite what we thought of him at the beginning. And the kind of tragedy of it is, by the end of the film, he is starting to become a character we actually could care about. He starts to open up, but at that point it's too late for him. He's already, Peter has already made a plan. So yeah, it's a real kind of, but yeah, I think again, it's not just the camera, but kind of everything from the costume to the architecture actually of the script, going way back to the book. At what point does a little piece of information come to you? And also the editing obviously is a huge part of it as well. Beautiful details in the barn, who's kind of the soul of his character, more or less, and as more we find details in the barn, we find more and more things in his own head, more or less. So it's like that's also beautiful. And the barn is kind of, we see more and more of this barn as more we see kind of his downfall, or his drawn towards a more sensitive character. So yeah, there was also a very wise, I think, idea of Jane's, that in the book there is no, we hear about Bronco Henry as an idea or something, kind of a ghost, but in a book you can talk about that in a way that you can't do in a film. So Jane made, I think, some very wise ideas in the adaptation to create that shrine, the saddle with the candle and everything. Maybe Grant, you can talk a little bit about that, but having something to physically interact with, a physical manifestation of a thought, I think also was really big in terms of the audience's ability to connect with Phil.
I think we sort of needed that tangible thing, because he's very much there. Michael Henry's very much there during the story. You know, he's like the fifth member of the cast in so many ways. But it's also the emotional core of this environment that Phil occupies. And Phil is very much, to me, in terms of the architectural side of things, the barn is Phil. The house is the family, and the house is it's very much under the thumb of Phil Burbank, and he sort of stalks around there, much like a sort of a minotaur in a way, in a labyrinth. He's sort of in this dark kind of environment. But when you really want to get to the heart and soul of Phil, he is the barn, and he's sort of separate to the house. There's a distance between the two, but there's also an alignment between the two. Like through the doors of the barn, we can see that sort of that connection back to the house. And there's also a sort of a, in a way, I see this sort of latterly in a way. There's sort of a classicism to the barn. It's like Phil has a classics degree. He's been to university, and he's got this sort of, you could say, this intellectual side to him, which he's kind of eschewed. He's pushed away in the interests of being more masculine than everybody else, being a dirty cattle rancher, doesn't wash or anything like that. So there's this sort of tension there, but inside there is this sort of classicism to him in many ways. Inside that barn, he makes these little delicate little pieces of furniture that he whittles away to give to his brother George. He's got this blacksmithing sort of activity, and this woodworking thing and leatherworking. He's kind of very good with his hands. He's very articulate with his abilities, but it's also got a facade of this brutal kind of workman-like cattle rancher. So it's all these sorts of things, you can read them. To me the barn is, it's like a coliseum in a way. It's all these columns and things like that sort of hold everything up. But it's in the guise of a barn. So I like all these sort of little subtle themes, because storytelling is not just verbal. It's not just words on a page. It's like pictures and images and these sorts of more subtle ways of communicating with the audience, I guess. I love that moment in particular where Peter is invited into that barn. The door's closed against Rose. So he's sort of, it's a very powerful beat, I think, dramatic beat, when he's sort of welcoming Peter into him, as he is that barn. Yeah. Anyway.
It's strange because you have the feeling that the house itself, not the barn, but the house itself is more a reference to the parents, and George is closer to that. Phil hardly inhabits the house, more the barn. But nevertheless, he doesn't let Rose really live in the house. And seeing that he's kind of almost choking her presence there, seeing that in this vast space you created, both of you created in the living room and the quarters, that's really a huge compliment from my side, I have to say, because seeing someone choked and being enclosed, not in a protecting family cocoon, but in a hostile space, was never seen so lonely for me like in this movie. It was really like she got lost in the space somehow. It was really the opposite I expect. So what was your approach to that, to distribute the spaces to the different characters? Like even Peter, he finds a very tiny space for himself at the desktop.
Yeah, look, I think when Rose and Peter, or Rose in the first case, gets introduced into the house, she comes in with a certain amount of optimism. Here she is, she's got married to this guy, and but she's also of a different social strata, and she's it's a big step up for her to be able to come to that house, but she gets squashed immediately, and she's not able to affect the environment in there at all. I think that she's always like this trapped sort of bird in a cage in a way, or that isn't able to affect her surroundings. She tries to, you know, in one instance to plant a flower bed outside, but you can tell that that's doomed. She's in this sort of very masculine, dark environment, but there is a sort of a room, the bedroom, that's a bit of a shelter for her, which is the only feminine room in the space. But it's not a very settling kind of room. I think that the wallpaper in there that Jane actually homed in on quite early on is quite intense, and and the furniture is quite sort of oppressive, and it's not the sanctuary that she really needs in there. So there's no escape for Rose, and so that's played on these equally sort of. It's a big boned house. It's a very wealthy person's house, but it's very unwelcoming to people like Rose and even Peter, you know.
Yeah, I think as well the kind of whole design of it, like some beautiful things they did with the sound as well. Even it's kind of echoey, you know, that you hear Phil's boots moving around, or even there's so many doors in this place at behind. It's almost so vast that there's no way to be safe there, because Phil could be anywhere. And I think what especially happens when somebody wages a psychological war on someone, like the way Phil decides he's going to destroy this person via the mind, not physical violence, but like a psychological violence. It's just as terrifying when they're there or when they're not there. The both is just as scary. And when the house is so big like that, and actually the camera never actually goes in all of the spaces, but we know there's more than what we actually see. That even in itself it makes anxiety, because he could be somewhere close by, we don't know. I think the size of it is also somehow scary. There's no place to be where you can see everything.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be interrupting from the dark here, but I think that I need to point out that Ari will have to leave us soon, so maybe you need to come to the last question.
Well,
maybe to Ari, because we found out that Grant has a little bit longer, so.
There you go, Matthias, it's yours.
Yeah, I had a question. During a 1 year's time of preparation and getting friends, getting close to Jane, did you ever talk about the difference between the male and the female gaze?
Actually, not too much, not directly. I mean, like Grant said, we actually, in general, kind of talk a lot about, every so often, about kind of, I don't know, the gender spectrum, I guess, that everyone has within them a bit of masculine, a bit of feminine, and sometimes it's more or less, or maybe it changes as well throughout our lives. And even in different environments, we enhance some part of ourselves to fit in somewhere. Then later in the day, we move along the spectrum to be something else because we need to fit in. But for me, I can't speak for Jane so much, but for me, gaze, it's just kind of, it's what we look at, what interests us. And we pay attention to what interests us, and that's where we naturally kind of spend our time thinking. So, and I think what interests any person is not just informed by their gender. It's almost everything that has been in your life until that point that you find yourself paying attention to something. So, and yeah, I think gender is one of the many things that informs. It can be what you were fascinated by as a teenager, what your parents did, all the experiences in your life. And I do think men and women do, because of the world we live in, have kind of different experiences in the world, and that does inform what interests us. So, but I think, every director has their thing that really fascinates them, that they know about, and some things that there's not so much of interest. So I think every film is a reflection of what interests a director in the world, and that's definitely the case in this film. I'm going to take this opportunity actually to say thank you, and I wish I could stay longer. I have to go to another commitment. But it's so wonderful to meet you both, and thanks for your wonderful questions. It's such a pleasure to talk with fellow DP and production designer. It's a really different experience. So
well, thank you
very much.
So much, both of you, and making those invisible emotions visible for us, with this beautiful movie. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you from all of us. Thank you for sharing your enthusiasm and your insights in your art. It was fantastic having you. Thank you, Ari. And good luck. Good luck. We hope to see you on that stage.
Thank you.
Bye, Ari. Bye.
Thanks.
So, Christian, now we have a last question to Grant.
Yes.
Or probably a little bit more.
I'm no, I thought we came to a conclusion. So
actually, it would be interesting because you named this quote, making invisible emotions visible. How was, Grant, for you, the growing from a 30-year-old experience to a new experience with the J now?
That's a good one.
How has it worked now? And was it a completely new experience, or did you mount on something you built years ago in the relation and the understanding from each other?
Yeah, well, look, my thoughts to do with Jane is that she emerged fully formed from our film school. I think she'd done one movie prior to me working with her all that time ago, in 1990 it was actually. And, even then I was really amazed at this person that I was working with, and how sort of articulate and how intelligent she was. So, I guess over the ensuing time, over the 30 years in between, we both got more experience of what we do. I'm feeling certainly a lot more confident about being able to turn out production design than what I did back then, because that was actually my first production design job with Jane. So there we go. I'd been an art director up till then, and so I had that responsibility for the first time, and it was very formative, and particularly formative because it was to do with quality and to do with intimate human-to-human relationships, and which is different to most films that I've done up till then, and a lot of films I've done since then are to do with kind of eye-popping whiz-bang kind of action films or what have you. But Jane's films are to do with the emotion, the underlying emotional connections that we have with each other, and sort of on a more sort of philosophical level. And I very much like that as a medium. So since for most of my career, I've sort of taken a page from her book really, and just aimed towards doing more sensitive, sort of character-driven stories as much as I can. But of course, being in New Zealand, I don't get that choice all the time. It's a small place, a small business, and I have to take what I can get. But I do still try and aim for those sorts of films.
And talking about the visual effects, did you expect already all the roughly 150 shots to be planned thoroughly beforehand, or was it like half of it and then the rest came later during weather changes and everything else? Or was it all thoroughly planned already?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting question, really, because we did, there were a few obvious things that we needed to do. We weren't able to afford to do the top of the house, although we'd very much like to have built it. We just couldn't go there with our budget. Beach, we couldn't afford to build all of Beach, so we just built a part of it. But Jane was, like many directors, she was very keen to not rely on visual effects as much as possible. She really is, keen on the real thing as much, in camera and the way we went about doing things. But I was quite surprised. I went to visit her during post-production and looked at a few shots, and here she was popping in a few extra things that we never talked about. The signage on the side of the Red Mill, it says restaurant, is sort of a vertical sign. She just put that in because she could. And so she got more confident with it, you could say, than what she was when we were doing the physical sort of side of the production. So I think,
Just a question in the middle. Did you use previous equipment for seeing on location what you're going to see later? No. Or did you just see the camera output?
No, we built a 3D model of the house so that we could kind of study it in all of its angles and things. But we never did actual previs the way that you would know it in filmmaking terms. It was there was just some quite Ari touched on it. There was some quite rough and ready storyboarding that was done by Jane. Really, I mean, her sort of drawing skills are not too bad at communicating these ideas, and that was it. We didn't have all these other sophisticated tools that other filmmakers use for that.
And Grant, I mean, the question we ask ourselves quite often is actually, how much were you involved in the post-production, kind of controlling what the visual effects guys were producing? Did you just like join them in the layouting? Did you have a word saying in that, or?
Well, look, as you're probably aware yourself, my job finishes. I stopped getting paid at the end on wrap. So, my being able to affect post-production per se is a little stymied by this. But I do attempt to be as turnkey as I can to produce all the architectural designs, all the textures and colours, and all the elements that go into making up the visual effects. And in the houses, in terms of the house, I should say, that's what I gave to the visual effects house, and that's what they copied exactly. For Beach, it was the same. We did a sort of a town layout for it, designed some of the buildings and what have you, but past a point, I'm gone and I'm on to the next show, really, while they're doing all that work. And Jane, she's very much a sort of a manager of things like that. So she was sort of doing some alterations and massaging, you could say. But they didn't, nothing changed fundamentally from what the designs were during the design process that I was doing.
Even seeing the kettle being multiplied several times was really impressive to see it in the visual effects reel. I mean, crowd replication with men is quite usual, but with kettle, it was really interesting to see how the kettle library works and everything. So it's very worth watching it and seeing your planning work as well in the compare before and after.
Yeah. I mean, they did go about doing those tiling while we were shooting. So all those were pre-planned, of course. And then, Jay would have. And Alt Effects was the production house doing that. Yeah, they did a very beautiful job of making it look bigger scale.
And have you been so lucky as it looks, as it seems to, with the weather during the shooting?
Yeah, well, look, it's New Zealand's an island in the middle of the ocean, and the weather changes all the time there, all the time. In fact, I'll just touch on something that Ari talked about earlier on. For those in your audience who've been to New Zealand, you'll notice that the air is a lot clearer in the South Pacific, and the sun is a lot brighter. So there's already this sort of contrast you're talking about inside to outside is way more prevalent than it is in the Northern Hemisphere and in Europe where you live. But look, just going back to the weather, we have to be very careful with the scheduling of the film because we were building the house during the winter-spring period, which is quite turbulent down the South Island. We get snow everywhere and gales and high winds and things like that. But it was happily, as soon as we started filming, everything sort of calmed down, and we were filming in the summer months, the sort of early to mid-summer months of the South Island, with its longer days. We had the longer days and this big sky sort of scenery that we have down there. So,
Thank you very much, Grant.
Yes,
okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we should come to an end, huh?
All right.
Yes, you're thinking still about a question?
No, I just like, I think we had a very productive, wonderful 1 hour with a lot of insights, and can't thank you much, Grant.
Well, thanks for
take the chance, Maria, probably we can take the chance to ask once into the audience if there's something up for questioning or further question. We have maybe not, maybe yes, just to have a chance for the audience.
Well, if Grant gives us a couple of extra minutes, we're happy to.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with that. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a question here any questions from the audience? Anybody would like to know something? By the way, we were 85. It's really good. So many people showed up. I'm very proud.
In the meantime, Grant, I have one question. How many different locations have you scouted before you found this plane you decided for shooting? Did you have many options?
Yeah, I couldn't give you an exact number. There's quite a few, but we boiled it down to 2, actually. And the other one was Army land. That was probably about 50 or 60 miles north of where we ended up shooting. Unfortunately, the Army would not let us on there, in particular because they use it for live practices. So there's ordnance all over the place. And so, they said, it's just going to be too hard to clear out any ammunition and all that sort of stuff. So, but that wasn't the prime reason. I must say, I think from the word go, I was more emotionally connected with the Ida Valley, where we ended up being. It was sort of a bit softer, and it also had more shape to it. I think that the mountain range was a lot more beautiful where we ended up actually shooting. And it was also, the nice thing about it was that it was, again, in considering the southern hemisphere where we were shooting this, the mountain range was to the north, so it got the backlight behind the north, and it got the side lighting in the morning and the evening on that mountain range. So, I think all those sorts of things sort of additively made up the best decision, I think. So.
But you even had to set up the shadow of the house according to the set extension now. Talking about sun and positions, because all you build up your mock-up house projects on the ground, but missing the roof actually. Yes.
We I built little cardboard models and brought them to Jane, and we sort of plotted them together about the relationship of all these different elements, because it wasn't just the placement per se. It was like, what are the landscape are we going to see through these windows, and where the alignment of the windows to the other buildings, and also the way that the buildings individually frame the landscape that's in between. So, there's some aspects of the farm, you could say, that were better than others, and we're trying to make the most of these key landscape elements. So it's a sort of a symbiotic kind of thing between the dramatic requirements of the layout of the buildings and what we were given in terms of the landscape. So yeah, where the sun went down, where the sun came up, that sorts of things.
Gives the audience a chance.
Well, nobody's raised their hand. Oh, there's a
question in the chat, Maria.
A question in the chat from Veit Helmer. How often are you present on the set during shooting, and are you fumbling on the decoration then?
Yes, good. I always start my day on location, but I'm very rarely there during the actual filming time. My work is largely done, interestingly, by the time they start filming. As you're aware, in the film business, my job is really all to do with the preparation, the designs, and bringing all these elements to the shooting day. And then past the point, I hand them over to the director and the DP and the actors, of course. And they sort of run with it. And so I'm usually working in advance the next day, the next week, the next month, and so on and so forth.
Well, thank you. I think we should let you go then. If there's no further questions, Veit says thank you as well.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Nice to see you all, and I wish you well.
Thanks for being with us and giving us such a great insight in the sceneries and the landscapes. It was almost visible in front of the interior eye. It was really fantastic having you, Grant. And good luck from us all.
Yeah, good luck, Grant.
March 27th. We'll be watching. Good luck.
Good.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.